In the Talmud, there's a debate between rabbis. What do we do with a house, or even more, a beautiful palace, if it's built on the foundation of a marish hagazul, on a stolen beam? Shammai says we have to destroy the entire building and return the stolen beam to its owner. You can't build something beautiful based on a lie. Hillel says, why destroy a beautiful home? Have the thief pay for the value of the beam so the palace can be continued to stand. Now, imagine that the palace we're talking about isn't a house, but rather our country. And the stolen beam isn't a beam, it's beings. What then can we learn from rabbis Hillel and Shammai? Rabbi Sharon Brous teaches that what is remarkable about this Talmudic argument, which dates all the way back to the 1st century, is that neither rabbi assumes that you do nothing. Both rabbis tell us that if you know that something beautiful is built on a lie, then you need to take action. What that action looks like is up for the dispute, but our tradition presumes that once you know a truth, inaction is not an option. We are at a point in our country. This is a moment of awareness where all of us finally get that we are standing in a beautiful house built on theft. It's a moment between consciousness and true action. And once we know this truth, once we get it, we can't go back to not knowing, to pretending like all this abundance wasn't stolen, to hiding behind inaction. And so maybe we say, defund the police, reparations, commit to no more displacement every time we want to build a shiny new stadium. Hand back the land, decriminalize nonviolent drug crimes. And then once we start making those changes, taking action, we may realize that there is true, tangible sacrifice required for repairing the breaches. And there's a hefty price for awareness. You know what I'm afraid of, though? I'm afraid that once we realize that part, we will cry out for simpler times when we felt safer. A time when we didn't realize how terrible the world could be, how truly broken this foundation is in our palace. When we get how hard it is to change and how much we have to give up, will we say, if I had known what defund the police meant, then I would never have? Sort of like when the Israelites said, if I had known the promised land would be this scary, we would have stayed in Egypt. Will we say, I just want to rewind the time before COVID when everything was simpler? The way the Israelites wailed to God saying, this isn't the deliverance we were looking for. Will we say, I can't do this? The way the Israelites cried out, I'd rather be dead than here. It took 400 years to lead to the emancipation of slaves in our country. And then after our country voted for freedom, it took 2 more years after that law was passed for all the slaves to be freed. Our claws were too tightly wound around what we felt life should be like. But there must have been something bigger than the cries of slaves, stronger than the threat of suffering, powered by courage of those who fled and those who abetted escape, or even more than courage, their ability to dream that the world they were living in didn't have to be that way, that made the change happen. Perhaps enough slaves looked within and said, God made me an equal and I deserve that. And enough slave owners looked within and said, God made me an equal, and therefore I must abide by that. And enough bystanders looked within and said, God made me equal, and therefore this is my battle too. And together, not just black slaves, but people of all races, genders, faiths, fought with everything they had to honor the essential truth of our faith, that every single one of us is B'Tselem Elohim, made in the divine image. And if we are truly made in God's image, and God is in each of us, then maybe the God in us will do something about the pain in the world and usher in a world of love. If you saw me on the street, what would you think? You'd see my hair, my nose if it wasn't covered by a mask, my eyes, my skin, and after taking all this in, would you then say, oh, Jew? Probably not. But if you saw me dressed like this, with a talit and a kippah, the vestments of our tradition, you would most likely be able to identify my faith orientation and therefore my minority status in a Christian normative country. Since I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I don't outwardly present as a Jew. Therefore, my minority experience is one I can choose to reveal. Much like my status as a second-generation American, or that I speak French, or that my favorite color is green. I can take this off and fade into the majority white culture. I do this on planes when I don't want to tell the random guy near me what I do for a living. I do this when someone says, "Merry Christmas," and I sidesteppingly say, "You too." I do this when I'm talking to someone who probably has never met a Jew before, carefully waiting to see if it's safe to be myself. One term for this concept for those of us who are minorities but have white skin is called white passing, a term borrowed from mixed-race African Americans that sometimes is used to describe racially ambiguous appearance. Unlike white Jewish individuals, our Jewish institutions cannot pass under the majority gaze quite as easily. We might put up security deterrents or call ourselves something besides a synagogue or build away from the road, so at first glance it might be less obvious that we are a Jewish institution and therefore different in our targets for violence. And in sadness, I concede that when I drop my children off at their Jewish school, I'm glad that there are protections in place to keep them safe from those who want to harm Jewish people. For those hours in that building, they are at their most vulnerable because it is there they are most visibly Jewish. It feels wrong that as soon as they come home riding their bikes out in our cul-de-sacs, out in the open, that they are categorically safer because their Judaism is less obvious. The anti-Semitic attacks in our country have risen by 12% in just 1 year. Almost all of them, the assaults, murders, harassment, and vandalism, have targeted visible Jews, meaning our Orthodox Jewish brothers and sisters, and overtly Jewish buildings like synagogues and Jewish community centers. We know the price of not passing, and yet perhaps we don't talk enough about the price of passing. American Jews have a unique gift in this moment of our country's development. As we seek to right the wrongs of the generations before us and return the stolen beams back to their rightful owners, we know what it's like to be on the outside, to fear for our lives, to be hunted and killed simply for who we are. And many of us, as a predominantly, but not exclusively white faith tradition, know what it's like to be on the inside, to feel safe in the presence of police officers, to be judged by our gifts and not what others presume us to be, to not fear that while bird watching in a park, someone will see us and in fearing for her life, thereby endanger ours. It's so rare to understand both of these experiences. However, inasmuch as passing is a privilege, white passing comes with its own prison. When we forget that revealing our identity is a choice that others do not have, we concede the grace that comes with vulnerability. One of my favorite photographs of all time is of a menorah on a windowsill in Berlin taken during Hanukkah around 1948. You see the menorah shining her light against the background of a large Nazi flag. The pride and risk in that photo always stirs me. It reminds me that one of the mitzvot, the commandments of the Hanukkah season, is to place the menorah in an outwardly facing window for two reasons. One, to remind Jews that are traveling in the darkness that they are close to home, and two, as an act of defiance. No matter what darkness comes our way, our light will persevere. There are times when hiding our identity makes sense, and that advertising who we truly are only invites pain. But for the majority of the time, for Jewish white Americans, hiding our identity is less about safety and more about avoiding discomfort. I believe that we have entered a period of Jewish life in America where white Jews need to stop passing. We need to be overt about who we are as part of our solidarity and mission to restore the beauty of our country. We can't return the stolen beam if we are still benefiting from the theft of that beam. So as long as we pass as white, we will only be white, and the suffering that our Jewish family experience will repeat itself as suffering in our black and brown families. If we truly believe that our own liberations connect with the liberation of others, that as Nelson Mandela cried, "None of us are free until all of us are free," then part of our rising up, Our solidarity means we need to stand together as ourselves without the benefit of this white cloak, the skin. The gift we have in this moment is to be visible. Liberal Jews must trade our white passing as an invisible minority and become visible. This way, we show up authentically and model that we are willing to risk our bodies as part of the change we want to see in this country. I am Jewish. I am proud, and I am scared of what doing, saying, and being that means. But I'm here anyways. And perhaps right now, there's a whisper in your head, because I'll tell you there's one in mine. Will you come for me? Maybe. Will I have more pain? Maybe. Will my own ancestors, my own grandfather, rise up in Olam Haba and say, no, I didn't die for this. Don't you know what being visible cost you? Pogroms, death camps, theft. And behind my grandfather stands every Jew who was murdered and beaten, humiliated, raped, robbed because they were Jewish. And that's where faith comes in, because history says the scales are tipped. Your visibility, your presence, and your whole self will only lead to pain. But also, no birth, no freedom, no change comes our way through grace alone. Presence costs, interpersonally, communally, globally. But if there's anything that we have learned in this moment, it is that we are all interconnected, and therefore, do we have the courage to live the faith that we claim to believe in and risk being vulnerably present? It takes a lot of energy to show up differently. It takes time, and it's different for each of us. There are many ways to do this. Try wearing something visibly Jewish, a kippah, a chai necklace, tzitzit. If you're marching or protesting, find a way to visibly show up as a person of Jewish faith. Or buy a Jewish justice sign and put it on your lawn or in your window or on your car or your water bottle. Check out this website of one we made here in Cincinnati that says, Lo ta'amod, do not stand idly by. It's free, and you can also sign up at the same time for a community conversation on race and Judaism. Challenge the Jewish institutions that you're a part of to rethink what safety looks like, not just for the white, heterotypic, cisgender Jews who come through our doors, but for all Jews and non-Jews who are part of our community. Learn more about ways to get involved with communities that believe that no palace is beautiful or worthy without reparations, like our community of Temple Sholom. You can check out our website to learn more about our work, ways to get involved, or to give tzedakah, charity, as a way to be a financial partner in this sacred ministry. During Hanukkah, inflate one of those giant mensches on the benches, or fill every one of your windows with a Chanukiah, or, you know what? Don't even wait for Hanukkah. Do it tonight. On this holiest of holy Jewish days, Kol Nidre, grab your Shabbat or holiday candles and put them on the windowsill. Be Jewish with every part of your spirit and body, and then shine that pride out into the world. This is how we begin to return the stolen beams. We let go of the farce that this is racial problem is not our fight. We stop benefiting from the relationship of the 1960s between Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and instead create new relationships and stories of marching ourselves alongside our neighbors. We refrain from saying words like, I get it, and instead are present in who we are, as we are, offering ourselves as the gift of mutual salvation. In our Torah, it takes a long time for the people's cries to reach God. In Exodus, we read, Vayishma Elohim et nakatam, vayiskor Elohim et brito. God heard their cries, remember the covenant. It takes persistent crying out to effectuate change. Erica Chenoweth teaches that there's a tipping point when communities can actually affect change. She says that it takes around 3.5% of the population actively participating in nonviolent protest to ensure serious change. No government or abiding system can withstand 3.5% of its population resisting without accommodating the movement or, in extreme circumstances, disintegrating. 3.5%, that feels so doable. There's something in this moment where all of our previous strategies are failing us. I don't know is the new mantra right now. Even President Trump is saying it. Like, when will there be a new normal? I don't know. We can't predict anything, which means we are being blessed with the opportunity to envision, to dream of a world we want to be in. There's a sacredness about this disruptive moment of the COVID times. And as we watch the world that we know crumble amongst our fear and pain, we also have the chance to investigate the core beliefs that we were raised on, actively pursuing the person we want to be and the part we want to play in defining the future. In our Torah, when the cries of the Israelites grow loud enough, God listens. And then Moses shows up on the scene to help usher in that change. We tend to think of Moses as a singular person, a leader who showed up as a response to his people's pain. I find that it is important to see Moses not as one guy during one time in history, but rather as an archetype that arises when the cries are loud enough to bring forth a movement. This isn't just a story. This is the moment we are living in. And maybe you're the Moses we're waiting for. Of course, one person or one group of people can't build a new world alone. Dreams of new worlds require a multitude of people who are joined under the common cause to return the stolen beams and build towards abundance. I believe that in every generation, we are offered a cusp, a moment of change that is less about how we fight and much more about how we build around a united dream. Each of us has a story in our lives where we or a family member or an ancestor rejected the way the world was and who the world said we were, and reclaimed our agency in pursuit of a new dream. We reach these moments of cusps, beings on the edge of what is possible, all the time. Sometimes we have the courage of the prophetess Miriam, or the vision of the high priest Aaron, or the mercy of God's mouthpiece Moses, or the fear, frustration, and desperation of the chosen people, the Israelites, lost in a wilderness. And just because we aren't always in a place of strength doesn't mean we have failed. Sometimes it's our cries that awaken change. Sometimes it's our vulnerability that builds coalitions. Sometimes it's our courage that pushes us closer to our next chapter. It is unrealistic to expect that we are just one element, one characteristic, brave, fearful, forgiving, loving, whatever it is, all of the time. The goal is to see ourselves as worthy and capable of action, of making things right, of changing, and of having faith. Even in a pandemic, even when we second guess ourselves, even when it's painful to protest, even when we feel stymied by our impotence, even when we're scared to be visible, even when something small, like a yard sign, makes us uncomfortable, even when we can clearly see the stolen beams but have no idea how to make it right, even when it feels like you're standing in the rubble of a toppled palace and all you see is the smoke and blindness of pain, even then our actions are not in vain. Our dreams are bigger than that pain. We have to try our hardest to embrace the cusp of the moment, even in the fearful desert that we live in right now. A promised land waits, so keep pushing. Keep insisting on change. Keep mailing in those postcards. Keep making those calls to vote. Keep offering your gifts to the dream. And don't for a second believe the voices that hover around us, or maybe even within us, telling us, it doesn't matter. You can't change the system. A being, a beam, this isn't a palace that you can save or change. Look instead for the voices who remind you that your dreams are worthwhile. Your bravery, your presence, your visibility, your vulnerability is needed. And every act, however small, has impact. As we rise together to call out to Avinu Malkeinu, we remind the God above and the God within that we are powerful and vulnerable and capable of redemption.